Hey, can you all hear me? Hmm.
I can hear you, Joey.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Michael.
But I'm not
Wherever
here
you are.
anyway.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Good morning if you're in North America. Good afternoon or evening for everybody signing in from Africa and the Himalaya. Really excited about today's Fourth Tuesday presentation. We're going to get to hear from a couple different members of the Appalachian SDLC team about what's been going on in Appalachia for the past couple months. This really builds for new faces or folks I would we're kind of building. We've done several of these Fourth Tuesday presentations over the past 2 years, and we've tried to make a point to have them not repeat the same stuff because we do a lot. So I would suggest to anybody who's interested, especially after today, go back, talk to Shannon. We have all of those previous sessions recorded where if you have questions about what is this black walnut syrup stuff, or what do they mean when they keep talking about all these different programs in maple syrup, we have that. And so instead of doing kind of as we'd originally thought, which was how did the 2023 syrup season go? Instead, we wanted to do a little bit more comprehensive picture to show you how the Appalachian program is really branching out. It's building on the inertia of its work in maple and syrups, but it's really building out. So with that, presented today, Joey is gonna kick us off and really talk about the work he's been doing over the past year in building out the Appalachian Agroforestry Network. And then we will hear from Lindsay about the unbelievable work that's happened around ag tourism and Maple Days in the past year. And then Jenny's going to bring it home by telling us, what actual impact we're having and what kinds of numbers we're getting back from the communities we work with. So with that being said, Joey, over to you.
All right, great. Thank you. In the world room where you guys are, can you see the presentation yet, the slides?
Not yet.
Okay. So if I can't see it, that's okay.
Give it a second, Joey. Yeah. Give us a sec, Joey. We'll have it going in a second.
Okay, great. I see it there.
Yeah, you're on the 20th slide. You're the first.
Yes,
All
right. All right. Okay, great. So hey, I'm Joey Alloy. I am the Appalachian Agroforestry Network Coordinator for Future Generations. So I'm going to start the presentation today by just giving sort of a brief summary relative to the work we do of what agroforestry is, why we're doing it, and sort of how we are doing it. And then I'll pass it off to Lindsay and then to Jenny to tell more specifically about our maple syrup work. But my job is sort of to lay the conceptual groundwork here and give a little programmatic context. Next slide, please. So what is agroforestry? Pretty simple. I've got two definitions there in the blue sidebar. One from the USDA's National Agroforestry Center, the other from our colleague and partner John Munsell at Virginia Tech. Basically, it's just the idea that you're bringing principles and practices from agriculture into the forest and bringing principles and practices from forestry into agriculture, really trying to make sure that you're looking at the entire farm holistically, right? There's lots of different ways of doing this. There's a picture of all of them: alley cropping, forest farming, riparian forest buffers. And if you guys have questions about those types of practices, absolutely ask them during question and answering. For categorical purposes, maple syrup production, because it's taking a value-added high value-added crop out of the forest is considered a type of forest farming. But do ask questions about these other practices if you have them in the question and answer session. So next slide, please. We have at Future Generations in the Appalachian program, we have a somewhat broader understanding of what agroforestry is, right? We're not just looking at things that you can eat and make medicines out of that are from the forest. We're also looking at at sustainable timber products as well, and ecosystem services, agritourism. And really, we work in that intersection here in the middle, right? Where we really see agroforestry coming together with agritourism, with small farm viability, and with outdoor recreation, right? It's sort of a broad approach to how we do the work, but I think as we discuss why we're working in agroforestry, you'll understand why we want to have this sort of really big tent approach to thinking about agroforestry. And a lot of it is really because we're just learning from producers here in Appalachia who are already thinking big like this. Next slide, please. So why are we doing agroforestry in the Appalachian program, right? So we are the Appalachian Sustainable Development Learning Community, SDLC, as Luke mentioned, right? And the purpose of an SDLC is to create regional networks of action learning and experimentation. The Appalachian Agroforestry Network is one of those networks, right? It's region-wide. We have partners, Maryland, Ohio, Virginia, getting to know some folks in Kentucky and North Carolina. And of course, we're based in West Virginia, where we have our strongest partnerships. We believe these are basic seed scale principles, right? That growth occurs through nurturing partnerships. Oh, I'm sorry, that got cut off. Something's wrong with the font. Oh, well. And that nurturing these partnerships looks like coordinating and facilitation that supports local human-centered development. As the outside-in partner at the SDLC, that's really our goal, is coordination and facilitation. Another basic seed scale principle, we are building from success rather than focusing on what's wrong. Now, what does that mean in Appalachia in particular? Next slide, please. Success, what does success look like? It looks like a really strong and vibrant cultural tradition of doing agriculture, getting medicine, having foodways and social and cultural history that are based in the Appalachian forest, right? That's what we mean by building from success. Agroforestry is the traditional way that agriculture has been practiced in Central Appalachia in particular, but really all over the mountains. There just hasn't been enough flat arable land to do this sort of large scale farming that is economically dominant in the middle parts of the country right now, right? And the forests are just so incredibly lush, vibrant, healthy, resilient, that it's silly not to incorporate them into your farm management plans, right? So that's one of the reasons why we're doing this here. It's really part of what it means to be Appalachian, right? But also, we believe that Appalachian agroforestry can be, or in some ways already is, an international model of just and sustainable social change, right? We think that the way that Appalachians are able to make a sustainable living off of the forest, it is and can be a model for how all of us internationally, globally, are going to have to engage in sustainable use in times of climate change, and like Daniel always likes to say, polyculture or polycrisis and all that. And in a more specific local context, we also think agroforestry is key to just economic transition in Appalachia, right? We are transitioning away from extractive industries. Whether we do it in just ways or unjust ways depends a lot on the actions that we take now. And we believe that agroforestry is key, not just in terms of economic practice, but also in terms of regional identity, right? This is who we are as Appalachians, as forest people, as people who engage in agroforestry. We think that is a different and better story to tell than the types of extractive stories that are more prevalent in the cultural imaginary at the moment. Next slide, please. So that's what agroforestry is. That's why we're doing it in the Appalachian program. And then how are we using the Appalachian Agroforestry Network to encourage a Central Appalachia to do all those things that we talked about, just and sustainable community change? Well, we do it in the three ways that we do everything at the university, right? Research, learning, and action. I'll give a few brief examples now, and then Lindsay and Jenny will give you more details here, but I'm trying to paint the broad picture of program-wide what we're doing. Our research has sort of been a cornerstone of what has made the Appalachian program successful. Scientific research into maple sap flow, operational efficiencies. We are writing the manual on best practices and best regulations for 3/16 tubing, which is the type of systems that we really need here in Central Appalachia, where we've got such great differences in height, right? We also do just nationally recognized research in black walnut syrup and sycamore syrup too. We're sort of leading the way on those types of syrup, because those are trees that are endemic to Appalachia, but not as useful for tapping in other regions, right? Learning, for syrup learning, we do in-person workshops, and we have a certificate course for maple syrup production as well. For riparian crops, which are another type of agroforestry that we mentioned at the beginning, right? We are in the middle of producing a series of videos and primers or white papers, whatever you want to call them, that tell you how to take care of your riparian buffer areas while still able to harvest things from them that can be part of your economic farm viability, right? And then our Reading the Woods program, which I tend to think of, it's most centrally, there is a method for looking at the forest, thinking what is naturally possible, what is socially possible and desirable in your family and community, and then what is economically feasible in the sense of being least risky and most like a low-hanging fruit, I guess. The method is central to it, and we teach that method to technical service providers through these sort of large field practices, which can have a large number of technical service providers learning at once, or through smaller woods walks where we have a forester and a botanical expert and an expert on birds all walk through the woods with the landowner at the same time. And then, of course, we do learning through webinars too. Webinars, tap talks, we do learning online. And then action, I'll probably talk the least about. We do have a collaborative brand for wholesale maple syrup production called Authentic Appalachia. On another day, I'd tell you more about that, because it's something I'm really involved in and is really interesting. But to set up the rest of the presentation, I'd say the thing that locals are most likely to know us for when it comes to our action to promote agroforestry in Central Appalachia is what I tend to call, leaning on the philosopher Albert Borgman, communal celebration, right? Marketing, promotion, and agritourism, all centered around maple syrup and making it a central part of our communities and having fun with it, really. So that's the bulk of what I had to say, and I guess at this point I'd like to pass it off to Lindsay, and then we can save questions for at the end of the entire presentation.
Okay. Thanks, Joey. As Joey said, my name is Lindsay Kazarick, and I'm the Communications Associate here on the Appalachian team. I'm going to talk about the community outreach efforts that we use here using multimedia approaches. So some of the ways that we utilize multimedia are through local efforts like with the Pendleton Times. Regional efforts are through things like West Virginia Living Magazine, and then we have digital outreach efforts that include things like paid advertising and then organic campaigns that we use on social media like Facebook. You can get to the next slide, please. So our outreach efforts for our maple syrup outreach, primarily for Mountain State Maple Days, actually start in December, even though Mountain State Maple Days are in February and March. The first thing that we do with National Maple Syrup Day started 2 years ago, I believe now, and it's an unofficial national holiday. We've used this to raise awareness in agriculture for our producers and our farmers, both locally and across the state of West Virginia. And most recently this year, we've crossed the border and helped in Virginia as well. We've used this to help highlight the versatility of tree syrups, not just maple syrup. I like to say that maple syrup is the gateway tree syrup. And so we've used this to help our walnut syrups and our sycamore syrup producers as well, to really highlight what can be done in cooking and in the baking world with what is growing in our own forests. So this has been a collaborative effort for both partnerships and to also help kick off the tree syrup season during what is a really busy holiday season. And so what you can see here is an example of an ad that we ran in West Virginia Living Magazine this year. And we sponsored a whole featured section, which was really cool. And you'll get to see more about that here a little bit later. But this just goes to show that our outreach efforts go months in advance. And it's really fun because it's a way that the producers get to participate in something that is normally not a busy time for them. So next slide, please. This here is another example of those outreach efforts in effect, and this is probably one of my favorites. This is not something that we created or we did. This is a community collaboration. This is an outreach effort that was done by the Franklin Moose, and this was really special. This happened this past year. This was something that they did with a local maple syrup producer. So on Thursday and Friday evening, their outreach included a collaboration where you could get maple donut holes, and that was with a maple producer local to them. And they had a Texas Hold'em poker tournament, which was really fun, not something that, they typically do. And they shared this ad on their social media and in the newspaper, and the EDA also helped promote this. But they also had a really fun event where they had a maple moonshine tasting with another producer. So this got a lot of traction. This was shared in a lot of online groups. And this was just really special because this was zero advertising dollars went into this, and this was all organic and a really fun collaborative effort in the community. Next slide, please. So what happens when we do this is that a three-way partnership is established, and who helps in that three-way partnership? So either a government entity like the United States Department of Agriculture or the West Virginia Department of Agriculture, or a nonprofit entity like the West Virginia Maple Syrup Producers Association. We've got our county representatives that play a part. So that looks something like our convention and visitors bureaus or our economic development authorities. And then we have obviously our producers and our farmers and our local businesses. We also are involved in this process as well, helping to facilitate. And then what happens when our outreach efforts occur is that we either ask that we have some real estate space on a website or a social media feed, or that there is some sponsored content or advertising space provided. And that's not done by us. That's normally done by that other entity. Some of the most effective are events or collaborations, as you saw with the Franklin Moose Lodge, or they're a product special where we've had gift baskets made up, or a new like maple donut hole special done somewhere. Those are all very effective and very popular, especially in our region. But when we work together and we come up with ideas on how the entities on the left can do something together, then we come up with the ideas on the list on the right, and that's where the magic kind of happens. Next slide, please. So what all of this has led us to is that we see higher pre-registration rates for our Mountain State Maple Days. We've had early exposure for tourists during a busy holiday season for Mountain State Maple Days, meaning that a lot of this outreach effort takes place during the holiday season when people are out and about and shopping and doing what most people do during a holiday season, but that's not a busy time for our producers. Our producers are busy in February and March. So this gets tourists, this gets consumers thinking about a busy time for our producers in advance. This also has given an increased media interest in our statewide event prior to the event occurring, which has also proven to be very beneficial, leading to visits from both our Ag Commissioner and our Deputy Commissioner in Agriculture. Producers and businesses participating in this event has grown across the state. What we have seen is that this is creating a more engaged maple enthusiast group, and not just in the producers. So people wanting to engage more with our producers, we want more producers want to participate, which is really cool. One of the things that you can see here on the screen is a dish that was served at Appalachia Kitchen, which is at the Corduroy Lodge in Snowshoe Resort. They were a new participant in the event this year, and raising awareness is increasing brand outreach and efforts before the holiday season, which places like a lodge at Snowshoe really wants to get in on. They see the value in doing things like this. So it's really been fun to see who's getting interested in what we're doing. Next slide, please. So the biggest bit of excitement that this has led to is our featured section in West Virginia Living magazine. This has given the most pre-exposure for our producers. And one of the producers even had their own featured story, Gary Mongold, our local walnut producer in Grant County, which has led to additional media opportunities, not just for Gary, but for most all of the producers that had some touch point in this section. They've had the opportunity to have follow-up stories, whether it be by an additional media outlet or by West Virginia Living. Again, they've done a phenomenal job with follow-up opportunities. Next slide, please. West Virginia Living provided an opportunity where the producers then had additional ways to promote themselves for Maple Days with a promotions kit that they could use, saying that they were featured in this edition and why they were featured in this edition. And they had their own media kit that they could use with that. And it was very beneficial for them for Mountain State Maple Days. And I'll let Jenny talk a little bit more about the impact that they had there. But at this point in time, can you pull up the PDF, please? That'll work. Yeah. So that's the cover. That on the front there, you can see our little nip bottle of authentic Appalachia. And you can just scroll through that. There's our ad. That's the featured story on Gary Mongold and his walnut farm in Petersburg. If you have not been there, it's close enough to here. I highly encourage everyone to please go visit it. Gary is super sweet. He's an awesome person. He's got a really cool setup. Please go check it out. But this was some other additional products made within the region from tree syrups. Not all of them are, wait, no, those might all be the maple. I can't see, it's too far away. Are those all maple, Luke? I can't remember. Okay, that's best, isn't it, at the bottom? Okay. But then we also have a maple tapping checklist so that if somebody has never tapped a tree before and they've really wanted to try it, they could give it a whirl. There were other value added products. So if maybe you didn't want to try syrup and you wanted to try something made with syrup, you could try that. We had a Maple Days map on here with the participants and where, well, that's half of it. On the other page, you see the other half. There it is. There's the other half of it with the list of where all of the participants are listed. You will see, here's the itineraries, which is really fun that you got an advanced look at where you could go for Maple Days and what was going to be available in each of those locations. So this was really fun, and it also set the producers up for success as well, because it made them think about what they were going to be doing and when they were going to be doing it in advance. And so that's something that we have been trying to work with them on for a little while. And this was the year that we actually got to make that happen. And as she continues to scroll, we should be, okay, that should be the end of it. I'm going to turn things over to Jenny.
Give us a minute. We're putting the presentation back up. All right. You're fine. So Lindsay talked a lot about outreach events. I'm going to talk a little bit about our outreach and education stuff that we've done, and then roll into some impacts that we've had this year. All right. So go ahead and go to the next slide. There we go. All right. So I'm going to talk about community education outreach, and all of these, I did not give myself credit for the pictures because I forgot. They're all pictures I've taken, so I can use them. Sorry about that. All right. So this is just kind of an example of some of we've done a really good job of getting the larger community excited about Maple and getting them to specific events through targeted outreach and targeted, like ad buys, et cetera, so on. We're also working not only to get kids excited and get adults excited about maple syrup in that way, but to get them excited in a way that may create some more producers out there too. And so over the past couple of years, we've been doing a lot of work around exposure events for youth in particular, but so that they can start to learn and get excited. And then if they get excited, then the next thing you know, they want to tap a tree and you end up making maple syrup in McDowell County, as I did this year. So the first picture is actually this is Dalton. This is one of the kids in McDowell County. We tapped out 15 trees down there this year at one of the schools, which actually resulted in the school system was so excited and the kids are so excited. And you might think that 15 trees isn't a lot, and it's not. We didn't get a ton of syrup, but what we did get was that entire school invested in going down over the hill a couple times a week just to see what happened, right? So they started having to divide up who went down over the hill to see if there was sap. And this is a 6 through 12. It's a tiny little 6 through 12. There's 60 kids in the graduating class. But because of that, the entire school system now is saying, how do we build this and how do we keep this going? And so they're exploring actually building a sugar house, and they've started talking to other people in the community that are actually they have maple on their property. And so they either want to tap or they want other people to tap. And so it's kind of this organic cooperative has sort of been built without anybody having to say, go do it, which is really cool. And it all started because there were a bunch of people going down over a hill in January and people kept driving by wondering what Kate and I were doing. Which is literally what happened, right? I was getting text messages from the sheriff's office saying, you know, is that you guys down over the hill? If so, we won't send the dogs out. And then the next picture, it's really what happened. And so the next picture, the kids took it upon themselves. They've started hosting outreach events, largely because everybody kept asking them about the maple syrup. And so because they were going to have to be involved working for us essentially for Maple Days, they said, we can't host our own Maple Days event, but we're gonna do it off time. So they did their own Maple Days outreach event. They did tastings. About 800 people in the community showed up over 4 days, which is insane in that tiny community. And then I'll talk about the Linwood stuff. That's just a really cute picture of Michael and Lindsay tapping a tree with second graders, but Linwood gets its own slide. So we'll talk about them in a minute. So next slide. All right, so this is just an example of all of Maple in the classroom that has happened without Kate or I having to do it, which I think is really impressive. The kids at Mount View basically took it upon themselves with a little bit of help from a couple of teachers to go and educate every single pre-K through second grader in 4 school systems about maple syrup and about tree syrup. And at first it started with them saying, you know, can we kit up some activities and take them to the teachers? Because the teachers were messaging them on social media and because they were sharing pictures, but it shows organic growth. And then the teacher said, well, can you guys just come and spend a day with us? And so pretty systematically, they stepped through every county that borders McDowell County and said, we're coming, the maple syrup train is coming. It's just coming in the form of a teeny tiny hatchback driven by 17-year-olds. And so you'll see later, but over 7,000 pre-K through 5th graders were educated this year, which is a crazy number to think about when you realize that Kate, Michael, and I are 3 people, and somehow these 3 kids have done that much, which is crazy. All right, next slide. Okay, so we have a really cool partnership with Nature's Mountain Classroom. This is basically a nonprofit that was set up by a woman who had been working with Extension for a while. She was a nutrition educator with Extension, but her background is in outdoor recreation and education. And her husband works at Snowshoe and is like 2nd or 3rd in command at this point. And she kind of was seeing how Pocahontas County Schools isn't integrated with Snowshoe at all. And so she said, how do I make that happen? And so Nature's Mountain Classroom was born out of that. And it is an organization that's meant to bring free outdoor recreation experiences to Pocahontas County youth, which is really neat. And so during the ski experience, so every 2nd grader gets 4 weeks of skiing. And it starts with ski education, et cetera, so on. Well, during their final time, they get a half day on the mountain, and then they get a half day of, they get to eat. That is a maple featured like breakfast for lunch. And then they actually get maple syrup education from the Future Generations staff. And so, yeah. So it's a lot of fun. And they get to go around to little stations and learn and play with stuff and ask a ton of questions and tap a tree that's not a real tree, but we set it up as though it looks like a real tree. So everybody gets a great experience out of that. And interestingly enough, a lot of those 2nd graders have come back and said, why don't we get to do it next year? And like, they have no idea what's in store for them next year. In 3rd grade, they get to go on an overnight camping trip, right? And so it's kind of this thing where I like maple is sort of the gateway to outdoor rec, I think, for them in a lot of cases. So it's really cool. All right, we'll go on to the next slide. We go to the state fair. I realize the state fair is in the summer, but it would be kind of dumb for me not to mention it because it's one of our largest outreach events. We go to the state fair. Last year we had a team from Future as well as the McDowell County kids and then a West Virginia State student that came up and helped for days at the state fair. And thankfully we had the youth there because they were able to assist our maple syrup producers who are making cotton candy in the West Virginia building. So this is the building that they sell all the West Virginia products out of, and the Department of Agriculture runs it. They set it up like a farmer's market. It's really cute. And they were able to actually make the cotton candy while the producers got to interact with the public. So it took a little bit of weight off of the Producers Association, which was really cool. And then the other thing that we do is we take the maple trailer down and we set up kids activities and set up education activities. It's a little bit further down. It's apart from the West Virginia building. And so we're essentially in 2 locations at the state fair, which is really neat. And this year we had over 1,500 people visit us just in our maple trailer. I have no idea how many people bought cotton candy, but it was there were a lot of folks. So pretty neat. All right, next slide. All right, I'm using Trout Fest as an example, but this is like smaller community events. So we either sometimes go ourselves, but also we lend out our stuff, right? So we have a lot of education and outreach stuff. I think the pancake breakfast setup that is ridiculous, that is adorable, but has been to at least 10 events since January 1st because everybody wants it. So we basically just we set up a series of stations that are interactive. So families can interact with their kids, families, adults can come and interact. We set up a couple of stations where like adults even get into it. And it's not just about it's sort of Montessori and like education style, because we're not there to dictate how the process goes or what the end result is, but it's more on this, like, your first exposure needs to be a positive exposure. You need to get excited, you need to feel, you need to touch things. And so we set up, I call them sensory boxes, just of like things you find in the forest, and like a couple of, magnifying glasses so that the kids can get real excited and see the plastic bugs. We don't put real bugs in, but they can like dig through and see the plastic bugs. And then they get to like build a lizard habitat and have a bunch of other neat experiences. Because if they're not comfortable, a lot of kids, believe it or not, don't get to go to the forest anymore. And so if they're not comfortable with pine cones and they're not comfortable with moss and they're not comfortable touching all of this stuff, it's harder to get them in the forest once they're 9, 10, 11, and 12. And so this is just a way to kind of bring it to them. Right. And then, another example of this, we put our state intern got to hang out at Spring Hill Cemetery for an entire day for their Founders Day event. And she did the whole syrup tasting, like maple, birch, everything from maple to birch. And if you've ever had birch syrup, you know why it's a little weird. But, she had the sycamore syrup, she had the walnut syrup, she had it all there. She had them compare it to pancake syrup. She had them take data by putting a sticker on what they thought was the most popular. So, and she saw 500 people that day and got so much data, it wasn't even funny, right? And we're just sitting here going, well, it's real data, right? And so we do events like that too. It's not just about the kids, but that opened up people to start asking, why isn't there black walnut syrup at the Black Walnut Festival? And we kind of, Meredith kind of sat there and said, well, there's not enough black walnut syrup in the state to show up at the Black Walnut Festival yet, but we're working on it. But it's opened up the conversations, and I know she is based in Charleston because she's a student state, but she's had multiple conversations over the past few weeks of people that like saw her there that are now seeing her out and about in other places and continuing to talk about syrup, which is really cool. All right, next slide. All right, we're going to talk about impacts. I put up East Up Branch Maple because I feel like we don't talk about them enough. We don't. They're one of our smaller Lincoln County producers. They're awesome though. All right, so next slide. All right, first I'm going to talk about how we measure impact, because it's different than research production impact measurement. Measuring community impact is hard. It's not clear, it is gray. These are kind of just the start of how we start to measure impact. So the easiest way is attendance, right? You want to know how many people are there. You want to know how many people engaged with you. At this point, you don't actually have any idea what those people did, right? You just know they showed up. We have been working with Virginia Tech over the past 2 years to have visitor surveys at our Maple Days events and at the Highland County Maple Festival. They stop essentially by carload. They get one survey, and it has everything from like, where did you come from? So now we know how far people traveled, which is really important for tourist data, to how many days are you staying here, to how much money have you spent in certain categories while you're in this community. And so we can get some really neat impact data around how many people, or around how much money each person spent. Because if you have attendance and you have an average dollar amount, you can now get a kind of a ballpark number as to how much money that community has received as a result of these activities. Now you need multiple years of data to get solid numbers, right? So last year was the first year, and so Highland County's error is from 1.3 to $2.05 million. And those of you in math realize that's a lot of zeros of problem. But that's a good number to start with. So this year it's actually that margin of error will drop significantly because then we'll have 2 years worth of data. And then we also are conducting one-on-one surveys and conversations with the producers, particularly the ones that have participated in Maple Days, in order to, our production team and our research team, our research production guy, the syrup production guys are talking to them about, how much syrup did you make? How much of this, how much of that? We're talking to them about, what did you do at Maple Days? How many people showed up and how much money did you make that day from Maple Days, so that we can start to get some numbers around that, and the whole goal here is to be able to have conversations with community leaders and other syrup producers to both encourage them to participate, but also to continue to build this community around these events. And then the last, which I am an engineer, I love numbers. I also am far more excited about the stories that end up being shared, because I think that people connect with those stories much better than they connect with a number, which is really cool. All right, next slide. All right, these are just some pockets of impact, right? So May 10th, I will have all of the data. But today I have pockets. All right, so I want to talk about, we've heard this story, the Appalachia team's heard this story a couple of times, but a family out of Colorado saw the West Virginia Living article and planned an entire trip around coming to the maple sugar shacks in the southern part of the state. And so none of us would have known about this, except we had survey teams stationed at each of these locations. And so they tracked their trip based on who they talked to, right? And so, they ran into Dalton and Karina at Tom's Creek Maple, which was their first stop. And then they ran into Daniel and Meredith at East Step Branch, which was their second stop. And so they just stepped their way across where we had entire survey teams. But they flew into Cincinnati, drove over, went to 5 sugar shacks, stayed the rest of the weekend in the New River Gorge, and then flew home. And that was right? I think it's insane, but also how cool, right? I do that to other places. It's really, you rarely hear people actually do that here. So it was really cool. An interesting tidbit that's already come out of the Maple Days surveys is a majority of the attendees reported that they either their entire goal is to either learn about maple syrup production or support the local economy. And so I think those 2 points, being people's motivations for attending Maple Days, show that what we perceived to be the reason is the reason that people are coming out. And so we need to continue down. When we have new producers enter, we need to say, all right, you got to have an education component and you got to have something for sale, or else, that's how you're going to grow your community. Over 7,000 students learned about maple syrup this year. We have had almost 3,000 people attend our outreach events, and I'm not counting Maple Days in that. That's the education component. So that's the state fair, that's Trout Fest, that's the Spring Hill Cemetery event. So we've had a huge impact there. And so far, of producers that between Lindsay, Meredith, and I have talked to, 5 so far have said that they have made over $2,000 in single day sales. And so for a producer, that is outstanding. A lot of our producers are running in I would call them medium-sized producers for Appalachia. And so for them to make $2,000 in a single day, that's what keeps them coming back for Maple Days, right? The largest bulk of their sales come over 2 days of the season. And that also keeps, the closer that the product is to you before it gets sold, the more money you get to keep and the higher price you can charge. And so for them, it can be the difference between having to set up a retail account where they're selling basically for nothing, they're basically at cost, versus, I can double that price if I keep it close to home. And I'm also getting to show my place off, which a lot of folks enjoy. So those are 5 nuggets of different kinds of information we've been collecting, and we'll have a lot more in the coming weeks, which is really cool. All right, I think questions are next.
Sorry, just looking at the number. So when you say West Virginia Maple Days, that's that map and people drive around. Okay, but those same people went to the fair and were there selling at the fair as well, the state fair. And so they're saying that they make more, like. they
More
made
money from Maple
money
Days.
on
Yep,
The 2 days.
yep.
So, okay. Did you,
Yep.
did you get a number at all, like a 50% less at the, and how long the state?
We
Right?
will, right?
Okay,
So
just-
we will.
just interesting.
Some of that was just like, this is an easy way to put it on a slide data,
Yeah,
right?
I
But
got
as we collect more and more information about the Maple Day sales, we'll be able to compare that to state fair sales. The interesting thing
Yeah.
is most of the producers in the state are not selling at the state fair, right? So the Department of Ag issues those contracts. And so there's only about 4 producers that
Oh, very
are at
interesting.
the West Virginia building.
Okay, thank you.
So, well, so like the syrup is there and those 4 producers are at the fair. But then there are additional producers, right? The Syrup Producers Association decides their own schedule and who shows up to do some of that education work.
Yeah, I was gonna say the main partner at the fair is the Maple Syrup Producers Association, and what they're selling is cotton candy, and then marketing themselves as an entity and saying there's these agritourism opportunities. We are this statewide and actually crossing state borders producers association. And so yes, we have representation. These 4 members are here selling their finished syrup and value add products. But then the Syrup Producers Association as an association is selling maple cotton candy at the fair.
Daniel. Daniel,
Ye-
Daniel?
Hi there, can you hear me?
yes.
Give a thumbs up or something. Well, fantastic. And greetings from Kathmandu. And I've been around Future Generations for a while now. And I've heard a number of mentions of medicinal plants being part of the Appalachian SDLC. If I could, this is one of the things that is being thought about. And I've been talking yesterday with our Himalayan colleagues, and they're talking about medicinal plants. So recognizing that this is a Appalachian discussion about syrups, what are you talking about with some of these other forest products, medicinal plants or something else like that?
So I'm assuming that's a question that I should be answering, right, team?
Yes, it is, Joey.
Yeah, so the one that we're obviously doing the most work with, I think, well, is elderberry. And elderberry is very common in Appalachia, not just as a medicine, elderberry syrup, right? But people put dried elderberries in their tea. There's a West Virginia cidery that puts elderberries in hard cider, elderberry wine, elderberry jelly, all that stuff, really old-fashioned ways of getting your medicine and having it taste good, right? And what we're doing is elderberry as a riparian crop is one that we have a video that shows sort of how you can get it to grow in a riparian area in ways that sort of prevent erosion, prevent animal waste from spilling into the creeks and rivers, and can still get a harvest from it, right? Elderberry is a robust plant. And it really does well there. In that same video series, and the videos, I mentioned this, but they are accompanied by like a sort of narrative document, a paper that explains how to do it in more detail if you don't have YouTube access when you're back in the forest. And the other one that we're doing is stinging nettle, which is a traditional forest plant that's used for medicine, but also for, nutrition. People eat it just as a food, and you can make fiber out of it as well. There's some folks, textile artists, who use it. It's not really that easy to do, but it's a good one to do. Sort of if you're looking for ways to create a unique value-added product that allows you to market your farm in direct-to-consumer settings. So those are the 2 that we're sort of doing the most work on, and that's mostly learning work, right? But through reading the woods, there's a whole host of roots that are used botanically. Ginseng's the most well-known internationally, and excuse me. And so our strong partnerships with the U Mountain Center with Virginia Tech's Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmers Coalition and with Appalachian Sustainable Development's Herb Hub. Those are all project and team partners and grant partners too. There's a list of 30 or so herbs that we try to educate technical service providers to be aware of and promote. It's really great and easy to grow ginseng under maple. And if ginseng likes it, then the other herbs will too, like black cohosh, blue cohosh, golden seal, false unicorn root. And some of the producers we work with make their own value-added products out of this stuff. And many of the technical service providers that we work with are now aware that they can help people manage their woodlots for these types of crops in ways that they couldn't. One great example, so we work with Shady Grove Botanicals that are based out of Randolph County, West Virginia. And really they did this all themselves. We can't take any credit for it, but they forest farm a lot of botanicals, understory botanicals, and then they'll make value-added products out of those botanicals and sell those, right? So instead of being caught in the whims of the international herb market, you make a tincture of drops from golden seal, and people take that as medicine, and it works. But of course, none of this is FDA regulated medicine. These are all nutritional supplements, technically considered, right?
Well, Joey, this is fantastic. And I just want to follow up because what's sort of cool for me is in Tibet, we're doing with some of these products, medicinal plants mostly. And of course, in Arunachal, we're doing stuff. And you mentioned a stinging nettle. Yesterday, Nawang and Surendra and I were talking about stinging nettle here in Nepal and making fabrics. So what's exciting for me is to start to see some of these parallels. And so thanks very much.
That's super cool. I'll have to make sure Surendra and Nawang get their hands on our nettle video when it's finished.
And Sarah, other questions? Chris, did you have one?
Yeah, Luke, I was just curious about, since this year seems to be a large increase of activity and intercommunication between the producers, have you already shown an increase for interest for the following year?
That's a good question, Jenny, Kate. I mean, I definitely think we've seen a lot of enthusiasm. So I went down and spoke at the West Virginia Hospitality Association annual meeting and invited everybody to Maple Days. It was all the CVBs. And I said, come to Maple Days or get involved. And I think from that, we've seen an uptick. Jenny?
I was going to say, Chris, where there's been a huge uptake of interest right now is in individual communities wanting to host Maple Days events. And so kind of where Pendleton was 2 years ago, where the restaurants were just getting on board, we've got a number of, like the city of Weston, for example, which is a small city off of I-79, which is prime location for tourists, has now said, oh, we want to embrace, we want to get all of our restaurants to have a maple feature, et cetera, so on. And then a couple of communities down in Lincoln County that didn't realize they had 3 maple producers in their own county are now looking towards like hosting. This is coming from me. This is a little weird. They're going to host a maple pageant, kind of like yep. So a couple, like basically kind of having festivals around maple syrup, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and then on the producer side of things, we've definitely seen an increase in interest in the association and what the association's doing. So that's been good. And then I also think we are getting more producers because people are seeing other people's operations and realizing it's doable. So.
Professor Hammond, do you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to respond to Daniel, his question about, and it referred to Nepal. There are a lot of strong parallels, as Joey started to mention. One is the conservation of these resources. The second thing is getting technologies into the hands of service providers. And both those are we're learning from Nepal, actually, the indigenous knowledge there. And I think that's very important for us to stress. The third thing I want to mention is that we've integrated through Reading the Woods and other programs the use and propagation of non-timber forest products with our maple syrup program. So we have examples in the field and great some great success in planting ramps, black cohosh, Joey mentioned ginseng, and others amongst maple trees in the sugar bush. So I just wanted to mention those three things.
Thanks so much, Tom. And for everybody who doesn't know, Professor Tom Hammett is our research faculty member here with us and also our close friend and ally down at Virginia Tech. Great to have you with us today, Tom. Other questions, either online or from folks in the room? Other comments from the Appalachian team? The one thing I was just kind of to add on to this as a comment, it goes actually in some ways back to how we're pivoting. One thing we're trying not to do is we don't want to try to become the masters of everything, right? Going to Daniel's question, there are some really great groups out there doing amazing work in the botanicals world in terms of propagation of herbs, addressing those issues. So that's not our job. Our job is to support them. Our job is to work effectively across. And that's what the agroforestry network is all about, is when we kind of look, especially when you look at all of Central Appalachia, multi-state, there's some awesome NGOs or programs doing little things in little pockets. And we want to be able to bring those up and work together effectively. So yes, there was a real hole in terms of no one doing research or technical training for syrup. So we stepped into that. But so much of our work now is to not always be the technical experts so much as be a convener and a facilitator of these conversations across the state. And I think that's syrup's been great. It's a great way to get in those conversations. But then what's been so unbelievable is everyone said, what are you going to do after syrup? And we said, we're just going to keep standing out here in the woods and talking about how everything goes together. And what's been unbelievable is that, you know, we've had ideas like, let's ship things out of state. Well, actually, we're having a lot more success bringing customers into the state, and that has much more radiating benefits. So those are just a couple observations from the kind of going back to what Joey very effectively opened with in terms of why are we doing this? You know, because at the end of the day, that is what sustainable community development seems to look like in Appalachia these days. And so we're really excited to work with you all in the coming year. Thanks, everybody.